Yes, and now when we just happen to be live here in Elsabugtog on Wednesday night, June 4th, and when we first heard of what was happening, there was a lot of rumors flying. My first instinct, only because of other factors, it totally smelled of a false flag. But in your analysis, go through the classic false flag and why Moncton is a false flag.
Well, I just to be sure, I can't say anything 100%. So I just examine all the information that comes in, and then try to process that, and then put together a sort of puzzle or an idea, put it together, the pieces, to try to figure out what happened. So when I see a lot of the hallmarks of what you see in these types of events happening, now the first thing that everyone should be aware of is that there was a shooting drill. It was a fire and shooting drill that occurred on the 29th of May in the town of Sackville. And Sackville is really the nearest big town to Moncton. It has an RCMP lockup there. That's where supposedly they took Justin after they had arrested him. And so having a live drill where they simulate a shooting and a fire on the campus of Mount Allison just less than a week before, like 5-6 days before the almost identical thing happens in Moncton, is extremely suspicious. It is one of the hallmarks of false flag events. And if you're talking about 9/11 or 7/7 or Sandy Hook or the Boston Marathon bombing, even the lax dummy whole escapade that they had at the Los Angeles International Airport this past year, all of them have drills. So when you see a drill that happens and the drill simulates the events, you have to be extremely suspicious. So that was the very first, or that's the biggest thing that I think that everyone should know this. I mean, it should be common knowledge, because I think these things get washed away really quickly. The mainstream media, of course, is all on board, and they will not cover, they will buy hook, line, and sinker anything that is reported. So we get the reports coming in like it's a fait accompli, right? And there's no questioning. There's nobody there to hold them to their word. There's nobody there to second guess the information that they're providing us, and we're just supposed to buy it because somebody's crying on television. There's some people that are upset. There's pictures of cop cars with their windows blown out. There's a pool of blood in a photo. All these things, they sell us this story. And analyzing these events, Sandy Hook is a really good one to look at, because Sandy Hook, they had a very limited amount of photos that they released, but the photos were all done to the dramatic effect to convince you that something had happened there. And I can almost all but assure you that nothing happened there. Children did not die. That is a hoax. That is a staged event. I think this one is more difficult to really pinpoint whether it is a hoax or a false flag. So I've been calling it a false flag, or I've been saying that it appears to me to be a false flag. Now, one of the first things that I came across was that the person who witnessed the arrest of Justin Bourque just happened to be a Canadian actress by the name of Michelle Thibodeau. And right away that set off warning bells for me, because there always tends to be actors involved. Now, this isn't a very well-known actress. She's kind of an up-and-coming young singer-songwriter actress, but she's gone to acting school. She's appeared in certain acting events. So, she's the only witness. She's the only one out of her family that does all the interviews with the media. And I found that very suspicious right off the bat, like that. There's many, many other things. One of the things that most people would notice is the photos, because the photos, as I said before with Sandy Hook, they sell the story. So the photos that we got to look at right away that came hot off the presses were of Justin Bourque. There was 2 photos of him. That in one photo, of course, it was the frontal, and then we had the rear. In the frontal photo, which was grainy, which is like how they like to do it, they don't want to give too much resolution because then it's too easy to analyze. So we have this grainy photo that shows him dressed up like Rambo, with carrying at least 2 guns and with a headband on, and looks like he's going out to do his rampage. So that is how they sell it. And then the other photo was the photo from the rear, in which he's standing still and he has just stepped into the sunlight. So he's just out of the shadow. It's a staged photo, and you can tell because he's not walking, he's standing still with his legs apart, and he just happens to be right out of the shadow in the sun. Like the photographer told him, okay, stop, and then they snap the photo. Now, you know, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to grab this kind of stuff, because I went immediately, tried to find out who took the photo. I heard all kinds of information. It was the RCMP. That was the first thing that we had gotten. But then we found out the name of the photographer, who goes by the name of Viktor Pivovarov, who is a professional photographer in Moncton, who happens to work for the newspaper there. And then the question becomes, well, this rampage, the first call came in at 7:30. So 7:30 p.m. Eastern Canada in spring. It's still not summer. And yet somehow a photographer from the local newspaper just happens to snap 2 photos of him, right, from the front and from the rear. And they look completely staged. And what are the chances, you have to ask yourself this, what are the chances that a professional photographer would just happen to be at the very right place at the right time to be able to snap those photos? And just the other day, I saw the other photographer. In fact, I bookmarked the interview because I've been very busy with my work that I haven't had time to go and dig into it. But the other photographer was the one who took the photos of all the RCMP vehicles, and he was being interviewed. I think it was on Global. I'm not sure, though. And he was saying how disturbed he was. Of course, he gave the no tears sort of recollection of his photos. And there's many things to take from those photos as well. We had analyzed them in group sessions, that all the windows of the cop cars, I believe there was 4 cars, 2 of them were unmarked cars. One was a luxury was sedan, I believe, and the other one was an SUV. Those were undercover cop cars. So that's another question. Why were they using undercover cars if they were just responding quickly to what's going on? There's probably a reason that they could give. And then you could ask about why each car, the windows are completely blown out. There is no bullet holes that you can see. The windows are just blasted out, and yet there's no bullets on the automobiles themselves. There's no bullet holes. So a lot of very suspicious things, because when you shoot at glass, usually you put a hole in it. You don't completely smash it in. So just those things alone, I think we looked into the actual people that died, and, you know, there's the information that I was able to get at the time was that these 3 guys had all been recently transferred to the Kodiak division. So I found that also to be a bit suspicious. Now, I don't know for sure if these guys have died. You know, I haven't had time to look into all the family members and stuff like that and analyze their interviews, because people have been sending me all kinds of things saying that it's the same old, where the nobody's crying, and they're talking about how it's surreal, all these catchwords that they use when they tend to use actors to play victims. I also did a lot of analysis of some of the witnesses. There was one, Virginia Boudreau, I think. I can't remember her name exactly, but she gave a completely conflicting testimony to the press about the whole event. She had said originally that she was inside her friend's trailer, and their children were playing in the window, and then her friend called her over, and she flew to the window to see Justin Bork. And then she said she was on the phone to the RCMP, but she knew that he wasn't after people because she was out on the end of her driveway and he was walking right by. And he could hear, this is Justin Bork I'm talking about, every single word that she was saying. So that doesn't make sense at all. Why would you take the chance of somebody who's carrying all these weapons, who they, quote, looked like he was on a mission, right? It looked like they wanted to do some real harm. Why would you take a chance and go outside where he could hear you in order to call the RCMP? And then she completely conflicted again, said that she had talked to all of her neighbors before, So how does she manage to talk to all her neighbors and still make the call when he just happens to be within earshot? And none of it holds up when you break it down. And this is what we see with crisis actors. We've seen it with Sandy Hook, the Boston Marathon hoax, all these different shootings that I've covered. It's always the same thing. The stories don't add up, and it's because these people are trying to remember a script. So when you're trying to remember what you're supposed to say as opposed to just remember something traumatic that happened. When something traumatic happens, you don't really have to think about it much, right? You just, it's there, it's natural. This happened, that happened. Usually it becomes extremely clear in your mind what happens, because that's what happens. Your adrenaline starts pumping, you start operating at a sort of maximum sort of level because you're alerted. Well, this, in this case, she is completely contradicting everything she says. Then we also saw that the other people that were interviewed at the same trailer park, and this is the Justin Bork trailer park, all said the exact same things. He was on a mission. He had a blank look on his face, like very scripted. They said exact same words, basically. So that is also a hallmark of false flag, where you have several people saying the exact same thing. So I think there's much, much, much more to get into with this. But I think just starting off with all those points, there's a lot to chew on there.
Yeah, and then there's the end game always. That's another thing, that how we need to arm the police with more weapons and ATVs or whatever armored personnel vehicles, and we need to take guns off the street. That end game. I remember on that Thursday, June 5th, watching CTV News. I hate that channel, but it's always a good indication of how accurate the false flag spidey senses that we had, because there was a lot of stuff in that previous week, which also coincidentally, and I'll get into soon enough, started on the 29th. But more an analysis of why Moncton and why not any other city in Canada. But the end game. Talk about the end game, which is a huge part of false flags.
Yeah, problem, reaction, solution. I'm sure most of your listeners are familiar with the term. You don't do these events just to terrorize the population. You do these events because you have a preconceived plan that you want to carry out. You want to bring in, or you want to take away people's rights. I mean, that's essentially what always seems to happen, right? We trade our liberties for security. Of course, as Benjamin Franklin said, those who trade their liberties for security deserve neither, right? And of course, that's exactly what has happened in the post 9/11 world. It's so easy to convince people that there's a boogeyman out there and that there needs, why does this happen? And then you have all the media, all these segments in the media that say, why, how? How can we let this happen? We have to find the solution. We have to stop this from ever happening again. What I saw, that's really what really disturbed me, because when I started covering this, I started watching the segments that were coming off the internet off of CBC and CTV News. In fact, it was CTV that I started watching first. And they had former RCMP deputy commissioners. They had two of them on, actually. One was on CBC, the other one was on CTV. And right away, they were talking about the problems that the RCMP have, that they're outgunned, that they don't have the resources, and, of course, that they need to be able to recognize these people quicker. They need to be able to have better profiling. They need to be able to, identify people that they view as threats. So the rhetoric coming out of the media, coming straight out of the RCMP, is that they want to be able to identify people who are not criminals. So, that's the good example with Justin Bork, because he has no criminal record. And so they were saying a lot of things like, this is why it's so dangerous, right? This is why there's many people like him. Now, of course, that's what they want to convince you. There's a lot of people like this out there, and we don't have a way right now to be able to watch them the way we want to. So I would say that some of the end game that they want to bring in, aside from gun control, because that's always a huge priority for this New World Order, and make no mistake, I mean, they are coming for your guns, and they want to have all your guns. I mean, they're trying to convince you now, so that 5-10 years down the road, when they bust your door and they take your guns, well, you won't put up a fight. They really are doing this. This is the United States. Be covering all these events in the United States, it always comes back to gun control. Sandy Hook is terrific example